Well, I'm thrilled to be joined again by Heather Keefe, and our conversation today will continue in our third installment related to the Bible in 3D, discovering death from an original perspective. And so, as I've introduced Heather in the past, you know her to be a person who thinks a lot and has studied and continues to study about the ways in which the original languages, not only to learn them, as she has completed her Hebrew studies with the Biblical Language Center, but now also is taking her Greek classes as well. And there's just a kind of a depth to the scriptures that shows up when we navigate the languages at that level. And if we don't know them, then we count on folks like Heather who do to come alongside and be our teacher. But we're using these various installments to be able to describe some of the help that's available to us through real practical resources, like the ones we've discussed in Blue Letter Bible and Bible Hub, as well as her as a resource. And then beyond that, or also to illustrate that in some various ways. Now, today, Heather, as you've brought our curriculum to us today to have this conversation, is related to something that's unique about Hebrew, is that if in English we tend to say, well, I drove through Rolla on my way to Arkansas, we wouldn't have meant much by that. But you're saying that when it comes to the Hebrew language, we need to pause and pay attention.
Right. And sometimes that happens in English too, where you're like, I drove through Rocky Fork or something like that. And it's a rocky fork in a creek. So at times that will happen, but I'd say that's probably not as often the case where it's just a
A
seemingly
random
random
name.
name.
In fact, my wife and I are from the Twin Cities, which is south of St. Louis, Festus and Crystal City. And the story goes like this, is that the Pittsburgh plate glass factory was right on the river that made glass company there, and that it was a dry city. And so therefore they would walk across the border into where the bars and taverns were, which was called Tanglefoot. As they were drunk, their feet would tangle. So the name was Tanglefoot. And as they incorporated, they realized they did not want that historical name to be a part of that. So the story that's told that seems to be told often enough that at least now it seems true is that then they opened the Bible and they stuck their finger on the name in the book of Acts, Festus and Agrippa. And so they named it Festus, not after Gunsmoke, Festus, but instead after Festus. So a good example of how, you know, things like this do exist in the English language. But in Hebrew, when we're reading across it, you're saying we need to pause and pay attention. Can you give us some further description and illustration of that?
Right. Most times in Hebrew, Hebrew name will tell us more about the person's character. A name of a city or a town could give us an idea of what that city looks like where it's situated on a hill, on a cliff, in a valley. There's different things. Or a little bit about the town itself. Or there's an example of David naming a town, like God broke out. So, of something that happened there. So, there's some significance about the name that's tied to the place.
Now, if I am going to try to say a word in Hebrew, are there some certain kinds of helps that you can give me as to how I can say it better
I could speak
if I want to use it?
Ivrit is the word for, yeah, Hebrew, the language, the Hebrew language. And there are a few rules of thumb. I have had people throughout the years that say, Heather, like how do you say this? And yeah, the first time I was like, wait, what? Like, but there are a few rules of thumb. One being the vowels in Hebrew follow the vowels in Spanish. So if you know Spanish vowels that go o, those are the vowels. If you're trying to say a different vowel, that's probably not right. Also, the accent is likely on the last syllable. So Torah, Yada. So a lot of people will say that people read the Torah. It's not the Torah. You're not spitting it out. It's the Torah. There are a few exemptions to that rule, of course, but that's the general rule of thumb. And also, probably the less hick it sounds, probably the more likely that it is. So it's like instead of if you're thinking Habakkuk or Habakkuk, Habakkuk would not be the right way. Habakkuk. It's the syllable, the accent is on the last syllable. Yeah. But I say bottom line is if you come across a passage that has this Hebrew word, whether it's a name or a place, just go for it and say whatever it is that you say with confidence, because really nobody else in the room likely knows. And even if you go to audio Bibles and listen to different versions, different readers will pronounce different names of places or people differently.
So I hear you saying that none of us were there. And
Right.
we don't know anybody that was there, and so
Yeah.
therefore there are some general principles, but
Right.
no one knows exactly.
Or when you're reading an English Bible, all those names and places have been anglicized. So you wouldn't talk about David, the King David, or I'm reading the book of Ruth. No one would like Ruth. It's Ruth.
Mhm.
So
There's a way to
Yes.
communicate
Mhm.
in the process of that. All right, anything else on that before we move on?
There's a couple places that you can go for help if you really want to find out the pronunciation of a Hebrew word. I Google Translate does a great job. There's a little button on there that you can listen to a native speaker say the word, which is very helpful. Just Googling it, or YouTube has lots of different videos of just well, there's no it's just audio, but they'll say words so that you can listen to the proper pronunciation. So those are great.
Okay,
Great
so
tools.
we talked about paying attention to how we say it and illustrating some ways to think about it and how if we want to communicate it for some
Mhm.
particular reason in a small group or to our faith community or to know, then these are helpful tools. But now we want to turn our attention to the ways in which you're communicating that the Hebrew placement of the words and the names needs a kind of attention, like I was illustrating earlier, that we tend to think of place not as adding to our communication in some specific way. But you have some illustrations for us where it's worth it to take the time to say, is the author doing something with what it is that they are communicating about a person's name having a more significance? I very commonly will say to a person, younger person in particular, to say to them, "Oh, I noticed that your name is Jack. Is it Jack or Jackson? Is that a family name? Is that some particular reason that your parents named you that?" And then it'll be like, "No, it's just Jack. It's not really Jackson," or however they might communicate it. But in the scriptures, a lot. Is that right?
Yes, it is
It
a lot.
has
I
meaning.
hesitate to say all, but
Place and names
Mhm.
really deserves us to pause and not run past. So
Mhm.
talk about that and then give us some illustration of it.
Yeah, and that would be hard to do in the English Bible because it would feel disjointed, like stop, go, stop, look it up, go back. So it might be, maybe pick a name or a place and look it up. Um, Bible Hub is the app is a great resource for you can just click on the name of the place and it will take you to the meaning or more information about that word. But
Since you brought up Bible Hub,
Yeah.
let's go ahead and do that. So um, talk to me about why you like it, and were you telling me offline that you like the app better than the desktop version itself?
Yes, I do.
Talk to me about it.
Okay. Well, if you want to switch over to the table cam, I can show a
do that.
picture, the icon for the Bible Hub, if anyone's interested in downloading it. That's what the sneak peek of what we're gonna do later. This is what the icon looks like. And if I go ahead and go into it, there's what it looks like. And down here, this book, it says interlinear. This is what I use a lot.
Gotcha.
So I use the interlinear version. It will come up with John 3:16. How nice. Like this can't.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if let's go down this way instead. There we go. Okay. So what I am going to do is I'm going to switch it to let's go up here to Samuel. We'll have lots of, here we go. Now there was a man of, let's see, you're like Ephraim, Ramathaim, Zophim, so many things. So you can click on this number here at the top. It says, so if you want to know something about Zophim, there's a blue number up there, and it will tell you it's a proper name. And it will tell you more about what the name means. Double height. I should have probably used one. A double height of watchers. So that gives you some sort of a picture.
Yeah, so I that's readily accessible.
Yep.
Is what you're saying is that with a couple of clicks you can be into it. Now, for those of you who are on our Apple or Spotify podcast, just remind you that the YouTube version is available. So if you are interested in following along with us visually, then you'll have to go to that to find as well. But anyway, even with your own phone, you can click around a little bit.
And one thing that I like is here at the end, it's called the Englishman's Concordance, but it tells you, it will show you like how many times it occurs. Like this is just once. And it will list the verses and what it is. So that's super helpful.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So illustrate this for us, if you would, in through an example in 1 Samuel 25 that you have listed here.
Right. So in 1 Samuel 25, Samuel has just died. David is still on the run from Saul. And we're told about a man who had some property and he was very wealthy. It seems when you're reading it feels like a change in the story. There's a shift. But it says that he has tons of sheep and goats and it's shearing time. And then we're told that his name is Nabal. Well, in English, we're like, okay,
That's
next.
weird.
Okay, so that's his name. Let's go on to more about the story. But in Hebrew, that word means fool. So when you read that in Hebrew, you have this very wealthy man and whose name is Fool. And then for me, it just brings up all kinds of questions immediately of like, well, if he's a fool, then how is he so wealthy? What's going on here? This doesn't add up. And then it goes on and it introduces his wife, Abigail, which means source of joy or my father's joy. So then you can start thinking, oh, wait. And the story goes on, and I won't tell the whole story, but just in that introduction, knowing the meanings of the names helps to inform and show you where the writer is going with the story and helps the reader make sense of what's going on.
Gotcha. I see that. It begs the question that I talk about in our institute as well, is that we're putting pieces together in ways that are possible, probable, and for certain applications. When we do this kind of work, we weren't there, as I've already said. We don't know this perfectly, but we do begin to see these connections made. And because we have such a high view of Scripture and want to handle it without doing it violence, then we find ourselves, though, unwilling to be able to say, oh, it is a part of the author's story to say Nabal was a fool. Abigail was probably, in some sense, wiser, certainly, and maybe had to do with the ways in which he had navigated this long. And there's just some, again, additional layer. So my emphasis is to say that we don't know this at 100%, but we're able to put pieces together in ways that it's beyond imagining, it's beyond guessing, but it's not probable or necessary as well. But there's a good potential, a possible application here at various levels because it can infect our then interpretation of how the author is using this story for them and then also then to for us.
Yeah, so the original reader, like it would inform the original reader of, oh, this is what's going on, or that's what that means, where, yeah, we lose out on that.
Another way to talk about this is, and I've not done a lot of work in this, though I intend to in this next season, is related to the use of the Old Testament in other parts of the Old Testament, as well as in parts of the New Testament. So this layering effect of how allusions are constantly taking place and what criteria needs to be available in order to say there's a high likelihood that the author is using a scripture that they have in mind in order to make the case that they're now making for this present context. Not dissimilar from our own teaching and preaching that we do as well. Okay, more to say on this Hebrew, or you want to go to the next example?
That sounds good, yeah. Just going from having in mind a fool and then someone that brings joy. And then the story unfolds and you can see how that plays out.
All right, 1 Samuel 25, so we'll give that as homework assignments. Okay, the next example.
The second example is there's a Hebrew word, it's called aver. It means it's used rather frequently in the Old Testament, like over 550 times. So it's common, and it means to cross over or to pass through. It's basically means to transition from one side of a place or thing to another, whether that's literal or figurative. It can also be in a positive way or a negative way. We'll see that it'll be used sometimes as sin, as like in the idea of like you've crossed the line. That kind of pass over to cross.
I was trying to think of a figurative example of how we would say that. That would be an example.
Yeah. Like you crossed the line or you've gone too far. That would be a negative. And then there's a literal and then there's a positive crossing over to something.
Okay.
So it happens a lot because that happens a lot in Israel. They're traveling.
Nomadic a good bit.
There's valleys, there's hills, so they'll cross from one hill over to the other, or there's cliffs where they'll cross over. So we'll see 1 Samuel 26:13, it says, then David crossed over to the other side. It is a very literal, straightforward use of that word, aver, crossover. And I wanted to look into an interesting verse that kind of opened my eyes more about the word aver. It's in 1 Samuel 29. It's verses 2-3, but just the first part of 3.
Well, that's easy. I only have to turn over just a few pages.
Mm-hmm.
Verse 2 and 3.
Yes, but if we could I don't know how the NLT does it, if we can pick it up, or if the ESV, we can hear it quite well, but.
Let me read here for a few verses. The entire Philistine army now mobilized at Aphek, and the Israelites camped at the spring in Jezreel. And as the Philistine rulers were leading out their troops in groups of hundreds and thousands, David and his men marched at the rear with King Achish. But the Philistine commanders, what are these Hebrews doing here?
Good. So in the ESV, it talks about the Philistines passing on by the hundreds and thousands, and David and his men were passing on. So you have that word of aver. It's the participle form, so passing. So the ovrim in the Hebrew, and then you get them saying, "What are these Hebrews doing here?" Which is the word ivrim. And when you look at them, here, we can switch over to the camera view. So this is the word ovrim at the top. There's no vowels in Hebrew. So this, if you don't know yet, this probably won't make a lot of sense until I show you the word Hebrews. The people of the Hebrews is Ivrim. So you're like, wait, what? Do those look the same? Yes, they do.
So these are all derivatives of the root word aver.
There. So right here, that's the root word of there. So when we have a participle, it's ovrim and ivrim. So all this to say is, yeah, there's no vowels. How do you tell the difference? How do you know what to say? Well, Hebrew was a dead language, basically from the time of the exile until like the 1900s, really, where it was brought back. It's the only language to have been resurrected. But when the rabbis noticed that the language, they wanted to preserve it, so they added vowel markings. So we're going to switch back to this so I can show the vowel markings here, what that looks like. So we have O, that indicates it's O green. Maybe I should make those bigger. That's Ovrim. So they didn't want to mess with the letters themselves, so they added these markings, these little dots and other little markings around the letters to indicate the vowels. That way the language could still be passed on. So that's Ovrim. This is Ivrim, meaning the Hebrews, the people. So there's that shows that it's an I. So I saw that and it was a huge eye opener. Because at first I read right over it and I had never put those two words together before.
So here in back to the text, here the Philistines are, and the point is that David and his men passed over, marched is the NLT translation, but the emphasis is they passed into the Philistine country.
Well, that they're crossing over, they're like going over to war.
Yeah.
So, and it's used a lot from like going from one side of a hill through the valley to the other side, or crossing a river, like you're going through, passing through, crossing through. So it was a light bulb moment for me because I realized that Hebrews, the people of the Hebrews, are literally the ones that have crossed over. And I had never put that together before.
Yeah. Other places that it shows up then?
What exactly? What part?
Like Abraham?
Oh, so where does it start? It does. So yeah, so it was just mind-blowing to me to think that, oh, okay, so the Hebrews are the ones that pass over. They are the ones that transition from one place to another. And where do we first see this? It's not, I immediately thought about the Red Sea, the people crossing through the Red Sea. And that would make total sense that that people is named that, just for the Red Sea alone. But that's not where it begins. It actually begins with Abraham. We're told in Genesis 12:6 that Abram passed through the land And he's called a Hebrew for the first time in Genesis 14:13. So he's one that passed through or crossed over. So
And I think also, of course, coming out of Egypt after the wilderness, from the wilderness and into, again, the promised land through the Jordan.
And yeah, ever since Abraham, there's example after example after example of God working in his people to have them cross over or to pass through certain things.
Now, of course, it begins to then, throughout the scriptures, beg to mind things like the Babylonian exile, and then, of course, the return back to the exile. And so all of it for me smacks of a kind of dependence on God, which is not something that, of course, we can make applicable here in a minute to ourselves and to what we experience as well.
Yes, it is a dependence on God, which Abraham he displayed and demonstrated for us. And we're all called children of Abraham. We're called children of Abraham. So in that sense, we, even though we're not called Hebrews, right? We're Gentiles, but we are people of God. We're children of Abraham, and therefore we too are called to be people that cross over.
And we so desperately, to use the word certainty again, we so desperately want certainty about what the future holds. And we don't like the sense of insecurity that we feel. And yet this is pointing out that we are in good company with how people of faith are entrusting themselves to the reality of uncertainty, ultimately in death, if the Lord doesn't come first in his second coming. And so as a result of that, we then are people who pass over as well. Other examples of this or ways to think you're thinking about it?
Oh yeah, I can think of so I started thinking, okay, what ways have we crossed over? And I don't know what comes to mind for you first.
First of all, forgiveness.
Forgiveness, yes. Going from like guilt and shame to forgiveness, or yeah. And I was thinking from death to life. We've crossed from darkness to light. Thinking of Colossians, where he says that he's come to rescue us from the dominion of darkness and bring us into the kingdom of light. So he's crossed over. He's made that possible. Thinking of Romans, from the flesh to the spirit.
Yes.
Crossing over.
Our ways of coping, our ways of surviving, ways of navigating an insecure world, an insecure family, in an insecure community. And we are entrusting ourselves that God is taking us somewhere. And then I certainly would think of passing over in from the shadow of death into death itself and into eternity.
Into light, yes. Death and life. And from slavery to freedom, slavery to sin, and freedom in the spirit. There's just so many ways that we can, and I'd love to hear more, like other people brainstorm too, of the ways that Christ has made a way for them to cross over from one thing to another, from one place to another.
And even in our own adventures, wouldn't you say, it's that I know you've experienced talking about early on some of your motivations for going to Laterno College and thinking about missions at that time, and a willingness similar to me in terms of a willingness to do whatever God asked of us. That's a willingness to pass over into an unknown. And then the adventure of life is that it becomes something other than what we had intended. We pass over, we cross over into an adventure that we didn't know that we wanted or needed.
It's so true, because so many times God calls us to pass over or to cross over into something new, and he doesn't tell us or show us what that is. We just have to have the faith to go in the direction that he's pointing.
And then sometimes there's a closed door and we're like, oh, what does that mean? And so we go a different route, and it's a good one.
Yeah, I'm kind of Abraham or Abram at the time. He just said, go to the land I show you. Well, there were no travel books then, right? So he didn't know where he was going. So God showed him.
Last time we were together, we discussed Micah 7:18. Comment on that in relationship to this word.
Right. So in there, to remind everyone, it talks about who is a God like you who pardons sin and forgives transgressions. The last time we talked about the pardoning sin of God literally carrying the sin. Well, this time that word forgives is the word aver. So it shows that God, he passes through or crosses over our transgression. Like I want to say, like, works with us through those. He doesn't allow it to be a barrier.
Yeah, it's not a barrier. It's not an hindrance for us.
Which I love because it shows God's deep love and his perseverance to, like, he's not going to let anything be a barrier. He's going to be with us. And we don't have the ability, we don't have the strength, capability of dealing with our own sin.
Yeah.
And so he's
We
the
carry,
one.
we carry relational debt to God, and he sets us free.
So, yeah.
Beautiful.
So I just love that he does that for us, that we should also be a people that crosses over, also be a people that forgives, that works through things towards reconciliation. It brings to mind Romans 5:10, where it talks about while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his son. So we were enemies, we were on one side, and then God made a way for us to cross through the death of his son so that we could be with him.
And then our formation is for also the sake of others. And so therefore we model to God the ways in which we don't let barriers of other people's acts keep us from continuing to do our part, our best to be able to love, forgive, and support as we're creating appropriate ways of navigating relationship and boundaries with them.
Right. Continuing to be a mirror of God's character. That reminds me of this morning I was reading 2 Samuel 14:14, where there's this wise woman of Tekoa that talks to King David. And it's just beautiful what she says. She says that God does not take life, but he plans a plan so that those who are banished from him will no longer be banished. So I just love that intentionality of he's going to think about it. He's going to devise some way so that those that are far from him can be brought near. And that speaks to David and reconciling some of his relationships. And it also should speak to us of the intentionality that we should also show.
Work hard to plan ways in which we might be able to be people who pass over other people's transgressions, other people's failures, other people's sins, and work hard to show love and compassion as we are able.
Yes.
Capacity.
Yeah.
Or not able.
Yeah.
To talk about our reliance on God.
Yeah, and the planning of that, the intentionality, the patience of that.
So I think a way that this impacts this conversation that we've had today impacts those of us who are experiencing it is to recognize that when we come across a name and we come across a place, then we, in taking it to the next level in 3D, is that we can turn to the Bible hub. We can look for the interlinear piece of that. We can see, follow the word. You showed us where we can click on it and come into the concordances, etc., and see other places that it is, as well as the ways in which that word has a meaning and a significance, and then look at other verses where the word shows up. And oftentimes there's a richness into the intentions of the author, and therefore it can impact and further our interpretation and meaning in the ways in which, like you've described today, the words that it's impacted your life as well. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, and I just say a lot of this is digging, like you're digging for treasure. Those that dig for treasure, sometimes it comes up of like, oh, okay, well, that wasn't very meaningful. It's just we'll keep digging some other place and something else. And sometimes it brings up gold, like this today, what we talked about. We are people that cross through. I mean, that's part of our identity as Christians. And so, like, that's gold.
Now, again, just a quick reminder about your resources, the blog that you have, and then is there a contact form there by any chance?
There is a contact
So
form
perhaps
on the-
those who are interested in further resources and understanding how they too could dig into Greek and Hebrew and Jewish studies, you'd be available to respond to that. So
Yes.
if they'll just get to that. So remind us of that website. how to
It's
get that.
heatherkeefe.com. And usually people can either say it or spell it, but not both. So it's Heather, Heather, and Keefe is spelled K-I. F is in Frank, F is in Frank, E is in Edward.
Yeah.
.com.
So one final E and then .com.
Mm-hmm.
So go there. And so anyway, good to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
I look forward to our next conversation.
Yes.
Thank you for
Me
this.
too. Thank you.